History is often written by the victors, but every now and then a figure emerges who is celebrated even by those he conquered. A king who was more than a conqueror. He was a liberator, a visionary, a unifier. This is the story of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Achaemenid Empire, a man whose legacy of tolerance and good governance echoes through the millennia. But who was this man Cyrus? His beginnings are shrouded in legend, a tale worthy of a myth. The most famous account comes from the Greek historian Herodotus. He tells us that Cyrus was the grandson of Astyages, the king of the Medes. Astyages had a terrifying dream that his grandson would one day overthrow him. Terrified, he ordered the newborn Cyrus to be abandoned and left to die in the mountains. But fate, as it often does in these grand tales, had other plans. And now, before your mind drifts deeper into this peaceful journey, take just a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. The baby was found and raised by a humble shepherd and his wife. He grew up strong, charismatic, and a natural leader among his peers. His royal lineage was eventually discovered, and while Astyages was initially furious, he allowed Cyrus to live, sending him back to his true parents in Persia. This story, whether true or not, perfectly captures the mystique surrounding Cyrus, a man destined for greatness, protected by fate itself. The Persia Cyrus grew up in was a vassal state, subject to the powerful Median Empire ruled by his own grandfather. But Cyrus was not content to live in the shadow of another. He possessed a rare combination of military genius and diplomatic skill. Around 559 BCE, he united the various Persian tribes under his rule, creating a formidable and loyal force. He saw the growing discontent within the Median Empire and knew his moment had come. Instead of a long, bloody war, Cyrus's rise was surprisingly swift. Many Median nobles and generals, tired of Astyages' harsh rule, defected to Cyrus's side. In 550 BCE, Cyrus marched on the Median capital of the Median army, already divided in its loyalties, offered little resistance. Astyages was captured, but in his first act as a new kind of ruler, Cyrus spared his grandfather's life. He didn't just conquer the Medes, he integrated them. He merged the Persian and Median peoples, creating a powerful dual monarchy. This wasn't a conquest, it was a unification. This single act set the precedent for his entire reign. Build, don't just break. With the combined might of Persia and Media behind him, Cyrus set his sights on the other great powers of the Near East. First came the Lydian kingdom in modern-day Turkey, famed for its immense wealth under King Croesus. The story of their conflict is legendary. Croesus, wanting to know if he should attack Persia, consulted the oracle at Delphi. The oracle gave its famously ambiguous answer: if you cross the river, you will destroy a great empire. Confident this meant his own victory, Croesus attacked. He was right. A great empire was destroyed his own. Cyrus's forces were victorious, and Sardis, the Lydian capital, fell. Again, Cyrus showed his remarkable clemency. He not only spared Croesus, but made him a trusted advisor. He understood that knowledge and experience were treasures far greater than gold. Next, the jewel of Mesopotamia, the seemingly impregnable city of Babylon, stood in his path. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was ruled by Nabonid, a king who was unpopular with his people, particularly the powerful priesthood of Marduk, the chief god of the city. For years, Nabonidus had neglected the traditional religious rites, causing widespread resentment. Cyrus saw an opportunity not for a brutal siege, but for liberation. His spies and diplomats worked within the city walls, spreading the message that Cyrus was not a foreign invader, but a restorer of tradition and order. In 539 BCE, Cyrus's army arrived at Babylon. The details of the conquest are a master class in strategy. Instead of a direct assault on the massive walls, his engineers are said to have diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed through the city. With the water level lowered, his troops simply waded through the riverbed and entered the city under the walls, meeting very little resistance. The people of Babylon, tired of their own king, reportedly welcomed the Persians as liberators. The city was taken with almost no bloodshed. This was unheard of in the ancient world, where the sacking of a city was a brutal, expected part of warfare. And what happened next cemented Cyrus's place in history forever. Instead of imposing Persian gods or destroying local temples, Cyrus performed the religious rites for Marduk, showing respect for Babylonian traditions. He then issued a declaration, now immortalized on a clay cylinder known as the Cyrus cylinder. This remarkable artifact, often considered one of the world's first charters of human rights, details his victory and his policies. It proclaims an end to tyranny, the return of stolen religious idols to their proper temples, and, most famously, it allowed deported peoples to return to their homelands. This included the Jewish people who had been held in the Babylonian captivity for decades. Cyrus not only allowed them to go home, but also helped fund the rebuilding of their temple in Jerusalem. For this act, he is hailed in the Hebrew Bible as a Messiah, a righteous ruler chosen by God. Cyrus the Great was more than just a military commander. He was a brilliant administrator. He founded the Achaemenid Empire, which would become the largest empire the world had yet seen. He organized his vast territory into provinces called satrapies, each governed by a satrap, or governor. This system allowed for efficient local administration while maintaining central control. He built the Royal Road, a revolutionary highway system that stretched over 1,600 miles, allowing for rapid communication and troop movement across the empire. He established a standardized postal system, the first of its kind, which could get a message from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of days. He created a realm where dozens of different peoples with different cultures and religions could live in peace and security. His model of a multicultural, tolerant empire was a radical idea for its time and would influence rulers for centuries to come. Cyrus's reign came to an end around 530 BCE during a campaign in the east against a nomadic people from the steppes of Central Asia. Even in his death, legend follows him. Herodotus tells a dramatic tale of how he was defeated and killed by the warrior queen of the Massagetæ, Tamiris, who sought revenge for the death of her son. His body was brought back to Persia and laid to rest in a simple yet elegant tomb at Pasargadae, the capital he built. The tomb still stands today, a humble monument to a man of immense power. The inscription, now lost but recorded by ancient historians, reportedly read, "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus who won the Persians their empire. Do not therefore grudge me this little earth that covers my body." The legacy of Cyrus the Great is immense. He wasn't just a Persian king. He became a figure of inspiration for the entire world. The Greeks, his traditional rivals, admired him. Xenophon wrote a glowing biography of him, the Cyropedia, presenting him as the ideal monarch and a model for all future rulers. Centuries later, the founding fathers of the United States, like Thomas Jefferson, looked to Cyrus as an example of an enlightened leader. He demonstrated that true power lies not in oppression, but in justice, tolerance, and respect. He built an empire not just with swords, but with ideas that were so powerful they have survived for over 2,500 years. Cyrus proved that a ruler could be both great and good. We're stepping back in time to the Achaemenid Empire, but we're not talking about Cyrus the Great or Darius. We're diving into the turbulent story of a lesser-known fascinating ruler, Cambyses II. He was the son of a legend, a conqueror of Egypt, and a man whose reign ended in mystery and chaos. Was he a mad tyrant, as some ancient historians claimed, or a misunderstood leader caught in a web of political intrigue? Let's unravel the story of Cambyses II. To understand Cambyses, you have to understand his father, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was a larger-than-life figure who built the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from the Mediterranean to the Indus River. He was known for his tolerance and wisdom. Imagine growing up in the shadow of a father like that. The pressure must have been immense. Cambyses was groomed for leadership from a young age. Inscriptions show that he was appointed king of Babylon by his father, a clear sign that he was the chosen heir. This wasn't just a ceremonial title. It was a real-world training ground for ruling a vast, multicultural empire. He was learning the ropes, managing a critical region, and preparing to step into the biggest shoes in the ancient world. In 530 BCE, the unthinkable happened. Cyrus the Great, the seemingly invincible conqueror, fell in battle while campaigning against the Massageta in Central Asia. The throne passed to Cambyses. The transition was smooth at first. The empire Cyrus had built was stable, and the succession was clear. But Cambyses knew he couldn't just rest on his father's laurels. He needed a victory of his own, a grand conquest that would solidify his rule and prove he was a worthy successor. And he set his sights on the last great independent power in the region, the ancient and wealthy land of Egypt. Why Egypt? For centuries, Egypt had been a major power, a rival to the empires of Mesopotamia. Conquering it wasn't just about gaining territory and wealth. It was a massive statement. It would mean fulfilling a long-held Persian ambition and closing the final chapter on the old world order. But invading Egypt was no small task. It was protected by vast deserts and a powerful navy. Cambyses was a meticulous planner. He spent years preparing, building up his forces, and engaging in some clever diplomacy. He made an alliance with Polycrates of Samos, a powerful Greek naval commander, securing the ships he needed to transport his army and supplies. He also allied with Arabian chieftains, who controlled the Sinai Desert, ensuring safe passage and, crucially, water for his troops on their arduous march. This wasn't a reckless gamble. It was a carefully calculated military operation. In 525 BCE, the Persian army arrived at the gates of Egypt. The reigning pharaoh, Psamtik III, gathered his forces for a decisive confrontation at the city of Pelut. The battle was fierce, but the Persian war machine, honed by decades of conquest, proved superior. The Egyptian army was crushed. Following this victory, Cambyses marched on the capital, Memphis. The city fell after a brief siege, and Pharaoh Psamtik III was captured. Just like that, after thousands of years of independence, the land of the pharaohs was now a province of the Persian Empire. Cambyses was crowned pharaoh, adopting the traditional Egyptian titles and protocols. He became the first ruler of Egypt's 27th dynasty. For a moment, it seemed he had achieved the ultimate triumph, surpassing even his father's legendary conquests. But the conquest of Egypt was just the beginning of his troubles. With Egypt secured, Cambyses' ambition grew. He planned further campaigns to expand his new African domain. He He wanted to conquer the wealthy kingdom of Kush in modern-day Sudan and the oasis of Siwa, home to a famous oracle. But this is where his fortune began to turn. The expedition to Kush was a disaster. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the army was ill-prepared for the harsh desert terrain. They ran out of supplies, and the campaign ended in a humiliating retreat with heavy losses. Similarly, the force sent to the Siwa oasis simply vanished into the desert, swallowed by a sandstorm, never to be seen again. These failures were a major blow to Cambyses' prestige and resources. Back in Egypt, things were getting complicated. Ancient sources, particularly Herodotus, paint a picture of Cambyses descending into madness and tyranny. They tell stories of him desecrating Egyptian temples, mocking their gods, and even killing the sacred Apis bull, a revered deity in the form of a bull. These accounts describe a man prone to fits of rage and paranoia. However, modern historians and archaeological evidence suggest a more nuanced reality. Egyptian records from the period show that Cambyses actually respected local customs, made donations to temples, and largely continued the policies of the pharaohs he replaced. The story of the Apis bull's murder is contradicted by an inscription showing that the bull died of natural causes and was buried with full honors by Cambyses himself. So, where did the Mad King narrative come from? It likely originated from Egyptian priests and nobles who resented Persian rule, and was later amplified by Greek historians who were natural rivals of the Persians. While he may have been a harsh ruler, the tales of insane sacrilege are probably exaggerated propaganda. While Cambyses was bogged down in Egypt, a crisis was brewing back in the heart of the empire. A man claiming to be Bardia Cambyses' younger brother seized the throne. The problem: Cambyses had secretly had the real Bardia executed years earlier out of fear that he would become a rival. This usurper, a magus named Gomata, looked remarkably like the dead prince and managed to win the support of many provinces, who were tired of Cambyses' long absence and heavy taxes. News of this massive rebellion reached Cambyses in Egypt. His reign was on the brink of collapse. He had to act fast. He gathered his loyal troops and began the long journey back to Persia to confront the impostor and reclaim his throne. But Cambyses would never make it home. In 522 BCE, while traveling through Syria, he died. The circumstances surrounding his death are one of history's great mysteries. Herodotus tells a dramatic story. As Cambyses was mounting his horse in a rage, the cap fell off his scabbard, and he accidentally wounded himself in the thigh. With his own sword in, the exact same spot where he had supposedly stabbed the sacred Apis bull, the wound became gangrenous, and he died a death scene as divine retribution. Another account from the historian Ctesias claims he died from an accident during a woodworking hobby. It's also entirely possible that he took his own life, seeing his situation as hopeless, or that he was assassinated by a rival who saw an opportunity to seize power. We will likely never know the full truth. The death of Cambyses plunged the Achaemenid Empire into absolute chaos. With the king dead and a usurper on the throne, a power vacuum opened up. The empire his father had built was on the verge of splintering. It was out of this chaos that a new leader would emerge. A distant relative of Cambyses, Darius, along with a handful of other Persian nobles, conspired to overthrow the false Bardia. They succeeded, and Darius I, who would become known as Darius the Great, seized the throne. He spent the next few years ruthlessly putting down rebellions across the empire, and it was he who commissioned the Behistun inscription, which tells the official story of these events from his perspective. In that inscription, Darius portrays Cambyses as a legitimate king but paints the usurper Gamata as the ultimate villain, justifying his own rise to power. So, what is the legacy of Cambyses II? He is often trapped between two giants of history: his father, Cyrus, the founder, and his successor, Darius, the organizer. He is remembered, often unfairly, as the mad king who lost his mind in Egypt. But the reality is more complex. He was a capable military commander who achieved something his father never did: the conquest of Egypt. He was a planner and a strategist. However, his ambition may have outstripped his abilities, leading to disastrous campaigns in Africa. His long absence from the Persian heartland created the very instability that led to his downfall. His story is a powerful lesson in leadership. Conquest is one thing, but holding a vast empire together is a completely different challenge. He is a fascinating, tragic figure whose short, dramatic reign was a pivotal moment that nearly shattered the Persian Empire before it had a chance to truly flourish. What do you think? Was Cambyses a paranoid tyrant or a victim of propaganda and bad luck? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever heard of a king who might not have been a king at all? A story so strange it sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but it's etched right into the annals of ancient history. We're diving into one of the most bizarre and contested successions of all time. The tale of or as some called him, Gomata. The man who ruled the mighty Persian Empire for a fleeting moment in 522 BC. Was he the long-lost brother of a king, or a brilliant impostor who pulled off the greatest political scam in history? Let's unravel this mystery together. To understand this story, we need to go back to the ruler before our mysterious man, Cambyses II, son of the legendary Cyrus the Great. Cambyses was an ambitious king, determined to expand the Achaemenid empire his father had built. His greatest prize was Egypt, a land of ancient gods and immense wealth. After conquering it, Cambyses spent several years there, consolidating his power. But back in Persia, trouble was brewing. The empire was vast, and managing it from afar was a monumental task. Whispers of discontent began to spread across the land. According to the most famous account, written by the Greek historian Herodotus, and backed by Darius the Great's own inscription, at Behistun Cambyses had a younger brother named Smyrdes, or Bardia. In Persian, before setting off for Egypt, Cambyses, consumed by paranoia and jealousy, secretly had Bardia assassinated. He feared his brother would usurp the throne while he was away. The murder was so covert that almost no one in Persia, not even members of the royal family, knew that the true Bardia was dead. This dark secret set the stage for an incredible deception. While Cambyses was still in Egypt, a man suddenly appeared in Persia claiming to be But. He looked remarkably like the supposedly dead prince. This man was, according to Darius, a Magian priest named Gomata. The Magi were a priestly caste, influential but not of royal blood. Gomata, seeing an opportunity in the power vacuum and widespread ignorance of the real Bardia's fate, boldly declared himself the rightful king. The people of Persia, tired of Cambyses' long absence and harsh rule, were desperate for a change. This Bardia promised them exactly that. He announced a 3-year remission of taxes and military service, a move that instantly won him immense popularity and the loyalty of the man. The news spread like wildfire, and province after province declared their allegiance to to the new king. When word of the rebellion reached Cambyses in Egypt, he was initially bewildered. He knew his brother was dead. Realizing he had been outsmarted by an impostor, he immediately began his journey back to Persia to reclaim his throne. But fate had other plans. As the story goes, while mounting his horse in a hurry, he accidentally wounded himself in the thigh with his own sword, in the very same spot where he had struck the sacred Apis bull in Egyptian Act. Seen by many as a great sacrilege, the wound became infected, and as he lay dying, Cambyses confessed to his nobles that he had killed his brother and that the man on the throne was a fraud named Goma. He begged them to not let the throne of Persia fall into the hands of a Medo. But his nobles, thinking he was delirious from his injury and guilt, didn't believe his shocking deathbed confession. And so Cambyses too died, leaving the empire in the hands of the man everyone believed was his brother. With Cambyses gone, Gomata, the Megos, or as the people knew him, King Bordea, ruled uncontested. For about 7 months, he sat on the Persian throne. He continued his popular policies, and the empire seemed to be at peace under his rule. But he lived in constant fear of being discovered. He rarely appeared in public and never allowed the old Persian nobility, those who had known the real Persia personally, into his presence. This seclusion started to raise suspicion among the powerful elite. Juan Nobalmanutains had a daughter who was one of Cambyses' wives and had been inherited by the new king. He grew suspicious when the king refused to meet with him. He instructed his daughter to find out the truth. How? The real Bordea had his ears cut off by Cyrus the Great as punishment for some offense. Otanes told his daughter to feel the king's head while he slept to see if he had ears. The message came back. The man on the throne had no ears. It was Gamata, the Magus. Otanes now had the proof he needed. He secretly gathered a group of 6 other powerful Persian nobles, including a young man from a collateral branch of the royal family named Darius. Together, they plotted to overthrow the impostor. These 7 conspirators knew the risks. They were taking on a king who had the full support of the people, but they believed they were saving the empire from a usurper. In a daring raid on the palace, they stormed the king's chambers, fought their way past the guards, and confronted Guma. In the ensuing struggle, Darius is said to have delivered the final blow, killing the impostor and ending his short, strange reign. With the impostor dead, the 7 conspirators had to decide what came next. According to Herodotus, they debated the future of Persia's government, a fascinating moment where they supposedly discussed democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy. In the end, they decided to stick with monarchy and devised a contest to choose the next king at sunrise. They would all mount their horses, and the man whose horse neighed first would be crowned. Darius, ever resourceful, conspired with his groom. The groom brought Darius's stallion to a mare the night before. The next morning, as they approached the spot, the stallion remembered the mare and neighed. Just then, thunder and lightning cracked across the sky, which the others took as a sign of divine approval. And so, Darius became Darius the Great, King of Persia. Now, here's the twist. The entire story I've just told you comes primarily from 2 sources. The Behistun inscription, which was commissioned by Darius himself to legitimize his rule, and the writings of Greek historians like Herodotus, who likely got their information from sources friendly to Darius. Is it possible this whole imposter story was a brilliant piece of propaganda? What if the man on the throne was the real? But think about it. Cambyses was an unpopular king. It's entirely possible that Bordea, his younger brother, led a popular uprising against him. When Darius and his co-conspirators killed this king, they couldn't just admit to assassinating the rightful heir of Cyrus the Great. So, what did they do? They invented the story of Gomata, the Magus, the earless impostor, to justify their coup and portray Darius not as a usurper, but as a savior of the dynasty. This alternative theory has gained traction among modern historians. The details seem a little too convenient for the story of the missing ears, the deathbed confession of Cambyses that no one believed, the horse neighing contested, all feels a bit theatrical. The name Gomata itself only appears in Darius's inscription. Was he a real person or a convenient scapegoat? We'll likely never know for sure. The truth is buried under 2,500 years of history and propaganda. Was Berdia a beloved prince who was tragically overthrown, or was he a clever priest who almost got away with the ultimate political con? This ambiguity is what makes the story so captivating. It's a powerful reminder that history is often written by the victors. The tale of Gomata, the Magus, serves as Darius's founding myth, the justification for his seizure of power, and the beginning of his own long and illustrious reign. So what do you think? Was the ruler of Persia in 522 BCE the real Berdia, or an impostor named Gomata? Let me know your theories in the comments below. It's a historical whodunit that still sparks debate to this day. Have you ever heard of Alexander the Great? Of course, you have. But what about the empire he conquered? Who built the sophisticated, globe-spanning powerhouse that was the Achaemenid Persian Empire? The answer, in many ways, lies with one man, Darius the Great. His story isn't just about battles and conquests. It's set about a visionary leader who inherited chaos and forged an empire that would become the envy of the world. Let's set the scene. It's 522 BCE. The founder of the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, is long gone. His son, Cambyses II, has just died under mysterious circumstances on his way back from conquering Egypt. The throne has been seized by an impostor, a magus named Gomata, pretending to be Cambyses. The empire is teetering on the brink of collapse, with rebellions flaring up everywhere. It's a full-blown crisis. From this turmoil, a young nobleman emerges. His name is Darius. He wasn't the direct heir to the throne, but he was a member of a collateral branch of the Achaemenid dynasty. More importantly, he was ambitious, intelligent, and daring. Along with 6 other Persian nobles, Darius hatched a bold plan. They rode to a fortress in Media, confronted the impostor Gomata, and, in a swift and decisive move, killed him. But claiming the throne and holding it are two very different things. With the impostor gone, the power vacuum only intensified. Provinces from Babylonia to Media to Armenia saw their chance and declared independence. Darius found himself not a king of a unified empire, but a contender in a massive, empire-wide civil war. This is where we see the true genius of Darius. Over a single incredibly grueling year, he crisscrossed his vast domain, leading his army in 19 battles against 9 different rebel leaders, or liar kings as he called them. He was relentless, a master strategist, and a charismatic leader who inspired loyalty in his troops. One by one, he crushed the rebellions, stamping out the fires of dissent with an iron will. To commemorate this monumental victory, Darius commissioned one of the most incredible historical records ever created. The Behistun inscription, carved into a sheer cliff face high above a major trade route in modern-day Iran. It tells the story of his rise to power in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. It's a giant piece of royal propaganda showing a triumphant Darius with his foot on the chest of the defeated impostor Gomar, with the other captured rebel leaders lined up in chains behind him. This inscription wasn't just a boast, it was a message to all who passed. Darius is the rightful king, chosen by the supreme god, Ahura Mazda, and his rule is absolute. It also proved to be the key for modern scholars to decipher cuneiform script, making it the Persian Rosetta Stone. With the empire finally pacified, Darius could now turn from warrior to administrator. This is where he truly earned the title, the Great. He understood that you can't rule the largest empire the world had ever seen by force alone. You need structure, efficiency, and a way to connect its diverse peoples. His most brilliant innovation was the satrapy system. He divided the empire into about 20 provinces, or satrapies, each governed by a satrap, or governor. This wasn't a new idea, but Darius perfected it. The satraps were responsible for collecting taxes and administering local justice. But to keep them in check, Darius created a brilliant system of checks and balances. Each satrap was accompanied by a military general and a chief financial officer, who both reported directly back to Darius, not to the Senate. This prevented any single governor from accumulating too much power. Furthermore, Darius established a network of spies and inspectors known as the King's Eyes and Ears. These agents traveled throughout the empire, unannounced, observing the satraps and reporting any signs of corruption or rebellion directly to the king. It was an ancient intelligence agency, ensuring loyalty and keeping the central government informed about even the most remote corners of the empire. Next, Darius tackled the economy. He standardized weights, measures, and, most importantly, coinage. He introduced the darak, a gold coin of remarkable purity, and the silver sip. For the first time, a common currency facilitated trade across the empire, from India to Egypt. A merchant in Babylon could now do business with a trader from Lydia with ease, knowing the value of the coin in his hand was guaranteed by the king himself. This economic integration didn't just make the empire richer, it made it more unified. To support this burgeoning trade, Darius embarked on massive infrastructure projects. His most famous creation was the Royal Road. This incredible highway stretched over 1,600 miles from Susa in Persia to Sardis near the Aegean coast. It was more than just a road. It was an imperial artery. Equipped with a series of relay stations, royal couriers could travel its entire length in just 7 days, a journey that would take a normal traveler 3 months. This system allowed for unprecedented speed in communication. An order from the king or a report from a governor could traverse the empire in a flash, holding the vast territory together. Darius was also a master builder, leaving his mark with magnificent architectural projects. He established a new capital, Persepolis, a stunning ceremonial center designed to awe and inspire. The reliefs at Persepolis depict delegations from every nation in the Emperor Ethiopians, Indians, Scythians, Ionians, all bringing tribute to the great king. It was a visual representation of his ideal empire, a diverse but harmonious collection of peoples united under his benevolent rule. He also oversaw the development of a new script, Old Persian cuneiform. While other scripts were used for administration, this one was reserved for his monumental inscriptions, a symbol of Persian identity and imperial power. But Darius's reign wasn't entirely peaceful. His ambition eventually turned westward, towards the quarrelsome but wealthy Greek city-states of Ionia on the coast of modern-day Turkey. When they revolted against Persian rule, aided by Athens and Eritrea from mainland Greece, Darius was furious. After crushing the Ionian revolt, he set his sights on punishing Athens for its interference. This decision led to one of history's most famous conflicts, the Greco-Persian Wars. In 490 BCE, Darius launched his first major invasion of Greece. His fleet landed a powerful force on the Bay of Marathon, just a day's march from Athens. What happened next is legendary. The smaller, heavily armored Athenian army, against all odds, charged the Persian lines and won a stunning, decisive victory. The defeat at Marathon was a setback, a blow to Persian prestige. But it didn't stop Darius. He immediately began planning a second, much larger invasion, vowing to crush the Greeks once and for all. He was assembling a massive army and navy when a revolt broke out in Egypt, diverting his attention. Before he could resolve the Egyptian problem and return his focus to Greece, Darius the Great died in 486 BCE after a remarkable reign of 36 years. He passed on his empire and his obsession with conquering Greece to his son Xerxes. While Xerxes would famously lead the second massive invasion, it was Darius who laid the entire foundation. So, when we think of Darius, we shouldn't just remember the defeat at Marathon. We should remember the man who took a shattered kingdom and reforged it into a superpower. He was the ultimate organizer, the CEO of the ancient world's largest corporation. Through his systems of governance, his economic reforms, and his infrastructure projects, he created a model of imperial administration that would be admired and copied for centuries, even by the Romans who came long after. He transformed the Persian state into a true, stable, and enduring empire, setting the stage for the next 2 centuries of Achaemenid dominance. Darius wasn't just a king, he was an architect of empire. We're stepping back in time to the heart of the mighty Achaemenid Empire to explore the life of one of its most famous and perhaps most misunderstood rulers, Xerxes the Great. You've probably heard his name from the epic tallies of the Greco-Persian Wars, but there's so much more to his story than just the battles of Thermopylae and Salamis. Who is the man behind the legend? What drove his ambitions? And what was his empire actually like? Let's dive in. Our story begins in 486 BC. The great King Darius I has just passed away, leaving behind the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from the Indus Valley all the way to southeastern Europe. The question on everyone's mind was, who would inherit this immense power? Darius had several sons, but the choice fell to Xerxes. Why him? Well, Xerxes had a powerful claim. He was the son of Darius and Atossa, who was the daughter of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the empire. This direct lineage to Cyrus gave Xerxes an unparalleled level of legitimacy. It was a clear signal. The dynasty of Cyrus was secure. Upon taking the throne, Xerxes wasn't immediately focused on Greece. His first challenges were much closer to home. Rebellions had broken out in Egypt and Babylonia, 2 of the empire's wealthiest and most important provinces. Xerxes acted swiftly and decisively. He marched his armies into Egypt, crushing the revolt and reasserting Persian control. He did the same in Babylonia, putting down the uprising with a firm hand. These early victories weren't just about maintaining order. They were a message to the entire empire. Xerxes was demonstrating that he was a strong and capable ruler, just like his father. He was not a king to be trifled with. With the empire pacified, Xerxes could now turn his attention to a piece of unfinished business left by his father, Greece. 10 years earlier, Darius had launched an invasion of Greece, seeking to punish Athens for its role in the Ionian Revolt. That invasion ended in a shocking Persian defeat at the Battle of Marathon. For the Persians, this was more than just a military loss. It was an affront to their honor and a challenge to their authority. Xerxes felt a deep obligation to avenge this defeat. and finally bring the rebellious Greek city-states into the fold. It wasn't just about revenge, though. It was about imperial security and completing his father's vision. So began one of the most ambitious military preparations in ancient history. For 4 years, the Achaemenid Empire mobilized its vast resources. According to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus our main, albeit biased source for these events, Xerxes amassed an army and navy of unprecedented size. While Herodotus's numbers of millions of soldiers are almost certainly exaggerated, the force was undeniably colossal. Engineers were tasked with incredible feats, like digging a canal through the Mount Athos Peninsula to avoid the treacherous coastline that had wrecked a previous Persian fleet. And most famously, they constructed 2 massive pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, the strait separating Asia from Europe. Imagine the scene: a bridge of boats stretching over a kilometer, allowing an entire army to literally walk from one continent to another. This was a statement of power, a demonstration of Persian wealth, engineering prowess, and sheer will. In 480 BCE, the grand invasion began. The massive Persian army crossed the Hellespont and marched into Greece. At first, everything went according to plan. Many northern Greek cities, awed by the size of the Persian force, submitted without a fight. The first major obstacle came at a narrow coastal pass called Thermopylae. Here, a small force of Greeks, famously led by 300 Spartans under King Leonidas, made a heroic stand. For 3 days, they held back the entire Persian army, inflicting heavy casualties, though the Greeks were eventually outflanked and defeated. Their sacrifice became a legendary rallying cry for Greek resistance. For Xerxes, it was a costly victory that hinted at the fierce opposition he was about to face. After Thermopylae, the path to Athens was opened. The Persians marched south, capturing and burning the abandoned city. From Xerxes' perspective, his primary goal had been achieved. Athens, the city that had defied his father, was in ruins. Vengeance had been delivered. He likely believed the war was all but over. But the Athenian commander, Themistocles, had a brilliant and risky plan. He had convinced the allied Greek navies to gather in the narrow straits of Salamis, near Athens. He then lured the larger, more cumbersome Persian fleet into these confined waters, sending a false message to Xerxes that the Greeks were planning to flee. Xerxes, confident of victory, took the bait. He even had a throne set up on a hillside overlooking the bay to watch his navy crush the Greeks once and for all. But in the tight confines of the strait, the Persian fleet's numerical advantage became a disadvantage. The heavier Persian ships couldn't maneuver effectively and became disorganized. The nimbler Greek triremes, powered by determined citizen rowers, rammed and sank ship after ship. The Battle of Salamis was a catastrophic defeat for the Persian navy. Xerxes watched in horror as his mighty fleet was shattered. With his naval supremacy gone, Xerxes' supply lines were vulnerable. Fearing being trapped in Greece, he made a strategic decision. He would return to Persia with the bulk of his army, leaving his top general Mardonius with a still formidable force to complete the conquest the following year. This wasn't a cowardly retreat, as Greek sources portrayed it, but a logical military move to secure his position and his empire. However, the following year, at the Battle of Plataea, the allied Greek army decisively defeated and killed Mardonius, ending the Persian invasion for good. The dream of conquering Greece was over. While the Greek campaign is what Xerxes is most famous for, it was only a small part of his 21-year reign. After returning to Persia, he embarked on a massive building program that would define his legacy within his own empire. He focused his efforts on the magnificent ceremonial capital, Persepolis, a project started by his father. Xerxes completed many of Darius' structures and added his own grand creations, including the immense hall of 100 columns and the monumental gate of all nations. Inscriptions at this gate declare in 3 languages, "I am Xerxes, the great king, king of kings, king of the countries of all tongues, king of this great earth far and wide." These buildings were not just palaces. They were physical manifestations of the king's power and the empire's multicultural identity, with art and architectural styles drawn from all its subject peoples: Egyptians, Babylonians, Ionians, and more. This was the true heart of Achaemenid court magnificence. The later years of Xerxes' reign are less well documented and seem to have been relatively peaceful, with the empire stable and prosperous. However, his story ends in a dramatic and violent fashion. In 465 BCE, Xerxes was assassinated in his bedchamber as part of a court conspiracy. The plot was likely led by Artabanes, the commander of the royal bodyguard, and a powerful eunuch named Asp. The intrigue and bloodshed didn't end there. The conspirators framed Xerxes' eldest son, Darius, for the murder, leading to his execution. This cleared the way for Xerxes' younger son, Artaxerxes I, to take the throne, though he would have to fight off his own brother's rebellion to secure it. So, how should we remember Xerxes I? The Greek narrative paints him as an arrogant, hubristic tyrant, punished by the gods for his overreach. But from a Persian perspective, he was a powerful and legitimate king, the heir to Cyrus and Darius, who defended his empire, completed magnificent building projects, and ruled over a vast, multicultural state for 2 decades. His invasion of Greece, though ultimately a failure, was an understandable act of imperial policy. His real legacy is etched not just in the battlefields of Greece, but in the towering ruins of Pas, a testament to the splendor and power of the Achaemenid Empire at its absolute peak. We're journeying back to the heart of the Achaemenid Empire to uncover the story of a king often overshadowed by his more famous predecessors, Cyrus the Great and Darius I. We're talking about Artaxerxes I, also known as Longamenes or the Long-Ended. Now, why the long end? Ancient sources like Plutarch tell us his right hand was longer than his left, a physical curiosity that became his nickname. But his reign was far more than just a peculiar nickname. It was a period of relative peace, cultural flourishing, and intricate diplomacy that shaped the ancient world. So, how did Artaxerxes ascend to the throne? His path was anything but smooth. It was paved with palace intrigue and tragedy. In 465 BCE, his father, the mighty Xerxes, the first, the very same Xerxes, from the Battle of Thermopylae was assassinated in a court conspiracy led by Artabanes, the commander of the royal bodyguard. In the chaotic aftermath, Artabanes, aiming to seize power for himself, manipulated Artaxerxes into believing that his own elder brother, Crown Prince Darius, was the killer. In a fit of rage and grief, Artaxerxes struck down his brother, only to later discover the truth. He had been a pawn in Artabanes' game. Realizing the danger, Artaxerxes acted swiftly. He confronted Artabanes and his sons, decisively ending their plot and securing his rightful place on the Persian throne. It was a baptism by fire, a brutal lesson in the treacherous politics of the Persian court. But from these bloody beginnings, Artaxerxes would usher in an era of surprising stability. One of the first major challenges Artaxerxes faced was a massive rebellion in a crucial yet perpetually restless part of his empire, Egypt. Around 460 BCE, a Libyan prince named Darius II, with significant support from Athens, sparked a widespread revolt. Why Athens? Well, the Greeks and Persians were still locked in their long-standing rivalry, and Athens saw a perfect opportunity to weaken their adversary by striking at its wealthiest province. The Athenian fleet sailed up the Nile, helping the Egyptian rebels capture the city of Memphis. Though the Persian garrison held out in the city's citadel, the White Castle, for several years, it seemed the empire might lose Egypt for good. Artaxerxes, however, was not one to let a province slip away. He dispatched a massive army under his brilliant general Megabuzus. The campaign was long and arduous. Megabuzus methodically drove the Athenian and Egyptian forces back. In a clever strategic move, he had a canal built to divert the waters of the Nile, stranding the Athenian fleet and leaving their ships high and dry. The rebels were cornered and eventually defeated in 454 BCE. Inaros was captured and taken to Susa, and the rebellion was crushed. While a costly affair, this victory firmly re-established Persian authority over Egypt and sent a clear message to Athens about the empire's resilience. It was a critical test of his leadership and Artaxerxes' past, demonstrating that while he might prefer peace, he would not hesitate to use force to preserve his empire. Interestingly, the end of the Egyptian revolt didn't immediately lead to more war with Greece. Instead, it paved the way for one of the most significant diplomatic achievements of the 5th century BCE. The Peace of Callias, around 449 BCE, an Athenian statesman named Callias traveled to the Persian capital of Susa to negotiate a formal peace treaty. While some modern historians debate the treaty's exact terms or even its existence, ancient sources suggest it was a landmark agreement. The essence of the deal was this: Persia would recognize the autonomy of the Greek city-states in Ionia on the coast of Turkey and agree not to send its warships into the Aegean Sea. In return, Athens would agree to cease all military interference in Persian territories, including Egypt and Cyprus. This treaty effectively ended the Greco-Persian Wars, a conflict that had raged for half a century. It was a pragmatic solution for both sides. Artaxerxes secured his western frontier, freeing him to focus on internal matters, while Athens could solidify its own maritime empire without the constant threat of Persian intervention. This shift from open warfare to diplomacy was a hallmark of Artaxerxes' reign. He understood that stability was often more valuable than conquest, a perspective that set him apart from many of his more expansionist ancestors. Beyond the grand stage of war and diplomacy, Artaxerxes' reign was a time of significant cultural and administrative activity. He was a great builder, following in the footsteps of his predecessors. One of his most notable projects was the completion of the magnificent Hall of 100 Columns at Persepolis, a project started by his father Xerxes. This grand throne hall, supported by 100 towering stone columns, was a breathtaking symbol of imperial power and architectural genius. Imagine the ambassadors and dignitaries from across the known world standing in awe within that massive space, a clear statement of Persian wealth and authority. He also commissioned construction at his capital, Susa, further beautifying the administrative heart of the empire. Artaxerxes' court was also a place of surprising cultural exchange. Remember Themistocles, the Athenian hero of the Battle of Salamis, who had engineered the Greek naval victory against Xerxes? Well, after being ostracized from Athens, he ironically found refuge in the court of his former enemy's son. Artaxerxes not only welcomed him, but granted him governorship over several cities in Asia Minor. This act of magnanimity showed a ruler confident enough to turn a former foe into a subject. and it highlights the cosmopolitan nature of the Persian court, where talent, even from a rival, could be recognized and utilized. This wasn't just about the myth, it reflected a broader policy of integrating different cultures and peoples into the fabric of the empire. One of the most enduring legacies of Artaxerxes' reign comes from a source you might not expect. The Hebrew Bible, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah portray Artaxerxes in a remarkably positive light. According to the texts, it was Artaxerxes who issued the decree allowing the scribe Ezra to return to Jerusalem to teach the laws of God and re-establish Jewish religious practices. Later, he granted permission to his own cupbearer, a Jewish man named Nehemiah, to return to Jerusalem and rebuild its shattered walls. The Bible credits Artaxerxes with providing financial support and official letters to ensure their safe passage and success. This patronage was crucial for the Jewish community in Judea, which was struggling to rebuild after the Babylonian exile. Artaxerxes' policy allowed for the restoration of Jerusalem as a fortified city and the consolidation of its religious and cultural identity. His motives were likely pragmatic. A stable and loyal Judea served as a useful buffer province near the oft-rebellious Egypt. But regardless of his political calculus, his actions had a profound and lasting impact on the history of Judaism, earning him a place of honor within Jewish tradition as a benevolent foreign ruler who enabled a critical phase of their national and religious restoration. So, how do we sum up the reign of Art? He ruled for over 40 years, one of the longest reigns in the Achaemenid dynasty, and died peacefully of natural causes in 424 BCE. His time on the throne was unmarked by dramatic new conquests, like Cyrus, or massive administrative reforms like Darius the Great. Instead, his legacy is one of consolidation, stability, and diplomacy. He successfully navigated palace coups, crushed major rebellions, and astutely negotiated a peace that ended a 50-year war with the Greeks. He was a builder, a patron of culture, and through his policies towards the Jewish people, he played a pivotal role in the history of a major world religion. Artaxerxes Longimanus may not be the most famous Persian king, but his long and relatively peaceful reign was essential for the long-term health and stability of the vast Achaemenid Empire. He proved that sometimes the strongest empires are not the ones always at war, but the ones that know when to pursue peace. What do you think? Is a ruler who maintains peace more successful than one who conquers new lands? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever wondered what it's like to have everything, only to lose it all in the blink of an eye? Imagine being born a prince, destined to rule one of the mightiest empires the world has ever seen. You ascend to the throne, the world at your feet, but before you can even get comfortable, it's all snatched away. This isn't a work of fiction. This is the true, tragic story of Xerxes II, a king whose reign was so short, it's often just a footnote in history, but his story is a dramatic and crucial turning point for the great Achaemenid Empire of Persia. So, grab a seat and let us journey back to 424 BCE to uncover the tale of the king who ruled for just 45 days. To truly understand the blink and do miss it reign of Xerxes II, we need to set the stage. We're in the heart of the Achaemenid Empire, a sprawling powerhouse founded by Cyrus the Great. It stretched from the Balkans in the west to the Indus Valley in the east. This was an empire of immense wealth, cultural diversity, and military might. The king we need to talk about first is Artaxerxes, the first, who ruled for a remarkable 41 years. His reign was a period of relative stability after the tumultuous Persian wars fought by his father, Xerxes the First, the famous Xerxes from the Battle of Thermopylae. Artaxerxes had a complex family. His primary wife, Queen Damaspia, gave him his only legitimate son and heir, the boy who would become Xerxes II. But like many ancient rulers, Artaxerxes also had numerous children with his concubines. From these unions came at least 17 other sons. Pay close attention to two of them because they are the key players in our drama: Sogdianis and Otis. These three half-brothers Xerxes, and Artaxerxes grew up in the opulent but treacherous environment of the Persian court. It was a world of luxury, but also of intense rivalry and political maneuvering, where the whispers of ambition in the palace corridors were often more dangerous than an enemy's sword. In 424 BCE, the long reign of Artaxerxes I came to an end. He passed away, and as was customary, his legitimate son, Xerxes II, was proclaimed the new king of kings. Now, we Dante have a lot of detailed records about Xerxes II's personality or his actions as crown prince. He was likely well educated and prepared for the role he was born into. He ascended the throne in the royal capital of Susa, and the vast machinery of the empire began to shift its allegiance to him. Messengers would have been dispatched across the land from Egypt to Bactria carrying the news: "The king is dead. Long live the king." For Sheshistois, this must have been the culmination of his entire life's purpose. The weight of the empire was now on his shoulders, but a shadow was looming, and it was coming from within his own family. While Xerxes II was settling into his new role in Susa, his half-brother Sogdianus was watching and waiting. Sogdianus was the son of a concubine named Alagian of Babylon. As an illegitimate son, he had no direct claim to the throne. But in the cutthroat world of royal succession, legitimacy can be less important than ambition and opportunity. Sogdianus saw his chance. He knew that a new king is most vulnerable in the earliest days of his reign, before his power is fully consolidated, and so he plotted. The ancient sources, primarily the Greek historian Ctesias, tell us what happened next. It was a shocking and brutal act. A mere 45 days into his reign, while he was reportedly in his private chambers after a festival, and perhaps in a drunken state, Xerxes II was assassinated. The assassins were acting on the orders of none other than his half-brother Sogdianus. In one swift, violent move, the legitimate king was dead, and a usurper had seized the throne. Sogdianus declared himself the new king, hoping the empire would simply accept this new reality. The news of the king's murder must have sent shockwaves through the court. The man who was meant to rule for decades was gone in less time than it takes for the seasons to change. Sogdianus' reign, however, was built on a foundation of betrayal and murder, and it was destined to be just as unstable. His first act as king was to try and secure his power by eliminating any potential rivals. He began a ruthless purge. One of his first targets was a man named Bagarasus, a powerful and loyal commander who had been close to his father. Bagarasus had the grim task of overseeing the funeral procession for both the old king and the newly murdered Xerxes II. Upon his return, Sogdianus had him arrested and executed on a flimsy pretext. This act of cruelty backfired spectacularly. Bagarasus was incredibly popular with the army. His execution turned the military, a critical pillar of support for any king, squarely against the usurper's cruelty was making him enemies faster than he could eliminate them. And this brings us to our third brother, Ochus. While all this chaos was unfolding in the capital, Ochus was far away. He had been serving as the satrap, or governor, of the wealthy and important province of Hyrcania, on the shores of the Caspian Sea. Ochus was also married to their half-sister, the formidable Paris. Unlike Xerxes II, Orsis was not the legitimate heir, but unlike Sogdianus, he was patient, cunning, and politically savvy. He had been summoned to court by Sogdianus, who likely intended to eliminate him as well. But Ochus was no fool. He saw that trap. Instead of obeying the summons and walking into his own execution, he delayed. He gathered his forces, consolidated his power in the eastern provinces, and waited for the right moment. The army, already furious over the murder of Bagorazes and the Persian nobility, who despised Sogdianus for his illegitimacy and brutality, began looking for an alternative. Their eyes turned to Ochus. He was a son of Artaxerxes I. He had military experience, and he represented a return to some semblance of order. Seeing his support grow, Ochus made his move. He marched his army from his province towards the heart of the empire, not as a satrap answering a summons, but as a challenger for the throne. He declared himself king, taking the regnal name Darius II. Now, Persia was in a full-blown civil war, with two half-brothers vying for the ultimate prize. Sogdianus found himself completely isolated. The military had abandoned him. The nobility had turned against him. He had no legitimacy and no popular support. His reign of terror had lasted only a few months. Faced with the approaching army of his brother Ochus, Sogdianus had no choice but to surrender. Ochus promised him that he would not be killed by the sword, by poison, or by hunger. This might sound like a merciful promise, but it was a classic example of Persian legalistic cruelty. Sogdianus was executed by being thrown into a pit of ash. It was a horrifying death by suffocation, but Ochus had technically kept his word. He hadn't used a sword, poison, or starvation. And so, within a single year, the Persian throne had seen three kings. Artaxerxes I died. Xerxes II was murdered after 45 days, and Sogdianus was overthrown and executed after about 6.5 months. The ultimate victor was Zois, who now ruled as Darius II. The period of instability known as the Year of the Four Emperors in Rome has its Persian parallel right here. The incredibly short reign of Xerxes. The second is more than just a historical curiosity. It marks a critical turning point. It was the first time in the Achaemenid dynasty that the succession was broken by such violent internal conflict. This event shattered the precedent of a smooth father-to-son transfer of power. It opened the door to a new era where royal succession became a bloody free-for-all, where ambitious brothers, powerful court and queen mothers would plot and murder their way to power. The reigns that followed, including that of Darius II himself, were plagued by constant revolts, assassinations, and court intrigue. The stability that had characterized the empire under rulers like this internal rot weakened the Achaemenid empire from within, making it more vulnerable to external threats. One could argue that the seeds of its eventual collapse at the hands of Alexander the Great, nearly a century later, were sown in the chaos of 424 BCE. So what is the legacy of Xerxes II? It's a tragic one. He is the forgotten king, a man who held the greatest power on earth for a fleeting moment. His story serves as a powerful reminder that history isn't just about long reigns and glorious victories. It's also about the moments of crisis, the brief, violent episodes that change the course of empire. the 45-day reign of Xerxes II is a testament to the fragility of power and a dark omen of the troubles that would eventually bring down one of history's greatest empires. His name may be a footnote, but the events surrounding his death tell a much larger story about ambition, betrayal, and the beginning of the end. Have you ever heard of the forgotten king of the Persian Empire? Not Cyrus the Great, not Darius, not Xerxes. I'm talking about a man whose reign was so fleeting, so drenched in betrayal, that history almost erased him completely. His name was Sogdianus, and his story is a brutal, lightning-fast glimpse into the cutthroat world of ancient power politics. To understand how Sogdianus even got a shot at the throne, we need to rewind to the death of his father, the mighty Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes had a long and relatively stable reign, but the succession was anything but simple. He had numerous children by various wives and concubines. The legitimate heir, born to his queen Damaspia, was named Xerxes II, but waiting in the wings were other sons, including born to a Babylonian concubine named Alagene, and another ambitious half-brother Oshus, born to a different concubine. So, in 424 BCE, Artaxerxes dies. As planned, Xerxes II takes the throne. He was the legitimate king, the rightful ruler. But in the Achaemenid court, legitimacy was often less important than ambition and ruthlessness. And Xerxes II, it seems, was not ruthless enough. He had barely settled onto the throne of Persepolis when the first conspiracy began to unfold. After just 45 days, as the great king of Persia, while reportedly in a drunken stupor after a festival, Xerxes II was assassinated. Who was behind this shocking regicide? None other than our man, Sogdianus. With his primary rival out of the way, Sogdianus seized the throne. He was now the king, the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. He had power, he had the crown, but what he didn't have was security. He had won the throne through murder, and he knew that what goes around comes around. He was surrounded by enemies, both seen and unseen. His immediate problem was his other half-brother, Oshus. Oshus was the satrap, or governor, of the powerful province of Hyrcania, located south of the Caspian Sea. He was also married to their half Parysatis, a woman known for her cunning and political skill. Sogdianus knew that Oshus was the biggest threat to his reign. He repeatedly summoned Akos to the Capilla Susa, likely with the intention of eliminating him just as he had eliminated Xerxes II. But Akos was no fool. He saw the writing on the wall. He delayed, made excuses, and played for time, always secretly gathering his own support. He understood that the Persian military and nobility were fractured. He started to court key figures, promising them power and wealth if they backed his claim to the throne. One of the most important figures he won over was Arborinus, the commander of the cavalry. He also secured the allegiance of Arsames, the powerful satrap of Egypt. With these powerful allies on his side, Oshus was no longer just a provincial governor, he was a king in waiting. He marched his army from Hyrcania and openly declared himself the true king, taking the regnal name Darius II. Now, Sogdianus was in an impossible position. He was the king in the capital, but his authority was crumbling. The very army that was supposed to protect him began to defect, flocking to the banner of the charismatic and seemingly more stable Darius II. The nobles and military commanders saw which way the wind was blowing. Sogdianus's reign, built on a foundation of assassination, was proving to be weak and unpopular. Darius, on the other hand, offered the promise of a return to order. The defections became a flood. leaving Sogdianus isolated and powerless within his own palace. Seeing his support evaporate, Sogdianus had no choice but to surrender. Darius, too, now in complete control, made him a solemn promise. He swore an oath that Sogdianus would not be killed by the sword, by poisoned, or by starvation. It sounds like a decent deal, right? A promise of a merciful end. But this is ancient Persia, and promises often came with deadly loopholes. Sogdianus was taken and executed in one of the most horrifying ways imaginable. A uniquely Persian method reserved for traitors and oath breakers. He was placed in a tall chamber filled with ash. A wheel would then be turned continuously, churning the ash and causing the victim to slowly suffocate, inhaling the fine dust until their lungs gave out. It was a brutal, agonizing end. Darius II had kept his word. There is no sword, no poison, no starvation, just a room full of ash. And so, after a reign of just 6 months and 15 days, the story of Sogdianus came to a close. He's a footnote in history, a brief, violent chapter between two much longer reigns. His story is a stark reminder that in the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die a very, very unpleasant death. He gambled everything for the ultimate prize and lost spectacularly, vanishing into a cloud of ash and historical obscurity. What do you think? Was Sogdianus a victim of a system he was born into, or a ruthless usurper who got what he deserved? Have you ever heard of a king nicknamed the Bastard? No, this isn't a character from Game of Thrones. It's a real historical figure who ruled one of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen. We're diving into the tumultuous reign of Darius II, also known as Darius Nuthus of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. His story is a whirlwind of court intrigue, betrayal, and a slow, creeping decline that would change the course of history. So, buckle up, because this isn't your average history lesson. To understand Darius II, we have to go back to the death of his father, the great Artaxerxes the First. When Artaxerxes died, the throne was supposed to go to his only legitimate son, Xerxes II, but in the world of Persian court politics, supposed to means very little. Xerxes II's reign lasted a mere 45 days before he was assassinated at a banquet by his own half-brother, a man named. Talk about a family feud. Sogdianus seized the throne, but his grip was shaky from the start. This is where our protagonist, or maybe antagonist, enters the scene. At the time, he was known as Achis, and he was the satrap, or governor, of the wealthy province of Babylonia. He was also an illegitimate son of Artaxerxes, the first one of many, which is how he eventually got that not-so-flattering nickname, Nophus, meaning the bastard. Oxus was ambitious and cunning. While Sogdianus was trying to consolidate his power in the capital, Ochus was gathering his forces. He had the support of powerful figures, like the commander of the cavalry and the satrap of Egypt. He played a clever game, initially pretending to be loyal to Sogdianus, while secretly plotting against him. He marched his army towards the heart of the empire, and Sogdianus' support crumbled. Realizing he was outmaneuvered, Sogdianus surrendered. Ochus promised to spare his life, but promises from a usurper are rarely kept. Sogdianus was executed in a particularly grim way, suffocated in a room filled with ash. And so, Ochus ascended to the throne, taking the royal name Darius II. His reign began in 423 BCE, built on a foundation of betrayal and bloodshed. But if he thought his troubles were over, he was sorely mistaken. The chaos of his ascension was a symptom of a deeper problem within the Persian Empire. The central authority was weakening, and powerful satraps across the vast empire began to feel they could act with impunity. It was like a game of whack-a-mole. As soon as Darius dealt with one rebellion, another would pop up. One of the first major challenges came from his own full brother Arsaces. Teaming up with the son of a prominent nobleman, Arsaces launched a rebellion. He even managed to hire Greek mercenaries, a sign of things to come. Initially, the rebellion was successful, defeating 2 royal armies. But Darius was not wont to be easily defeated. He used the one weapon that often proved more effective than swords: gold. He bribed the Greek mercenaries, who promptly deserted Arsaces, left without his professional soldiers. Arsaces was defeated and surrendered, believing his brother would show him mercy. He didn't. Darius had both Arsaces and his co-conspirator executed in that same ash-filled room. It was a clear message. Loyalty was expected, and treason would be met with an unforgiving end. But the empire was fraying at the edges. Rebellions simmered in regions like Media and Anatolia. Egypt, which had always been a restless province, was teetering on the brink of breaking away entirely. The constant infighting and political instability at the heart of the empire created a power vacuum that others were more than happy to fill. And no one was better positioned to take advantage of this than the Greeks. During this period, the famous Peloponnesian War was raging between Athens and Sparta. For decades, Persia had largely stayed out of Greek affairs. But Darius II's satraps saw an opportunity. 2 powerful satraps in Anatolia, Tissaphernes and Pharnabadezus, began to play the Greek city-states against each other. Their goal was to weaken both Athens and Sparta, so that Persia could reassert its control over the Greek cities in Ionia, which they had lost decades earlier. They made a deal with Sparta, offering them gold and the support of the Persian fleet in exchange for Sparta recognizing Persian authority over the Ionian cities. This was a huge shift in policy. For the first time in a long time, Persian gold was directly funding a Greek war. Tissaphernes, in particular, was a master of this game. He would provide just enough support to the Spartans to keep them fighting, but never enough for them to win a decisive victory. His strategy was to prolong the conflict and bleed both sides dry. This policy, while clever in the short term, had a massive long-term consequence. It dramatically increased Greek influence and involvement in Persian affairs. Greek soldiers, politicians, and advisors became common fixtures in the courts of Persian satraps. Back at the capital, the court of Darius II was a snake pit of intrigue, largely orchestrated by his powerful wife and half-sister. Queen Parysatis was a force of nature. She was fiercely intelligent, utterly ruthless, and incredibly protective of her own power and her children. She and Darius had 2 sons who would become central figures in the next chapter of Persian history: the elder Artaxerxes and the younger Cyrus, who became known as Cyrus the Younger. Parysatis doted on her younger son, Cyrus. She saw in him the ambition and drive that she believed a future king needed. When Cyrus was just a teenager, she convinced Darius to appoint him as the supreme commander of all Persian forces in Anatolia, giving him unprecedented power. This was a direct challenge to the authority of the veteran satraps like Tis. From the moment he arrived, the young and ambitious Cyrus made it clear he was not going to play the same subtle games as his predecessors. He threw Persia's full support behind Sparta providing them with the funds they needed to build a powerful navy and finally crush Athens. In 404 BCE, Athens surrendered, and the Peloponnesian War came to an end. Cyrus's strategy had worked, but it had also created a powerful, victorious Spartan military with deep ties to Persia. More importantly, it had given Cyrus command of a battle-hardened army and a vast network of connections throughout the Greek world. He was popular, charismatic, and had proven himself a capable leader. And he had his mother, Queen Parysatis, whispering in his ear, fueling his ambition for the ultimate prize, the throne itself. As Darius II grew older and his health failed, the succession crisis loomed large. The rightful heir was the eldest son, Artaxerxes, but Parysatis was actively campaigning for Cyrus. She argued that Artaxerxes was born before Darius was king, while Cyrus was born in the purple, meaning after Darius had ascended the throne, making him the more legitimate heir. This was a weak argument, but it revealed the deep divisions within the royal family. In 404 BCE, Darius II died. His 19-year reign had been one of constant struggle. He had successfully held the empire together through sheer ruthlessness and political maneuvering, but the cracks were showing. The satrapies were more independent. The court was corrupt and decadent, and the Greeks were now deeply entangled in Persian military and political life. Darius had managed to keep the lid on this pressure cooker, but he left behind a deeply unstable situation and two sons who despised each other, one of whom was now king and the other who had a powerful army and an unquenchable thirst for power. The reign of Darius Naphos set the stage for one of the most famous conflicts of the era, the rebellion of Cyrus the Younger and the March of the 10,000. A story for another day. His legacy is one of survival, not of glory. He was a pragmatist who did what was necessary to hold on to power in a time of decay. He inherited a weakening empire and, through a combination of bribery, assassination, and shifting alliances, he managed to pass it on more or less intact. But the seeds of its ultimate downfall were well and truly sown during his tumultuous time on the throne. We're diving deep into the tumultuous, action-packed, and surprisingly long reign of one of the Achaemenid Empire's most fascinating rulers, Artaxerxes II, better known by his Greek nickname Mnemon, which means the mindful or of good memory. Why the nickname? Well, this was a king who had a ought to remember. His 46-year rule, one of the longest in Persian history, was a relentless saga of betrayal, rebellion, and brutal family drama. So grab your popcorn, because this story has more twists than a blockbuster movie. Artaxerxes II ascended to the throne in 404 BCE after the death of his father, Darius II. Now, you might think inheriting the largest empire the world had ever seen would be a pretty sweet deal, but for Artaxerxes, it was like being handed a beautiful, intricate vase that was already covered in cracks. His first and most immediate problem wasn't a foreign enemy, but his own flesh and blood, his younger brother, Cyrus the Younger. Cyrus was ambitious, charismatic, and deeply resentful that he wasn't the one on the throne. He believed their mother, the powerful Queen Parysatis, had favored him and that he was the more deserving heir. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. This was a full-blown existential threat to the crown. From his post as a satrap or governor in Anatolia modern-day, Turkey Cyrus began plotting. He cleverly used the pretext of settling a local dispute to amass a formidable army. The core of this force was a group of about 10,000 elite Greek mercenaries, some of the most disciplined and effective soldiers of the ancient world. In 401 BCE, Cyrus made his move. He marched his army from the coast of Asia Minor deep into the heart of the Persian Empire, heading straight for Babylon. He kept the true purpose of his mission a secret from most of his troops, especially the Greeks, until it was too late for them to turn back. Artaxerxes, finally allotted to the scale of the threat, gathered his own massive imperial army and marched to confront his brother. The two forces met at the Battle of Cunaxa, not far from modern-day Baghdad. The battle was a chaotic and bloody affair. On one flank, Cyrus's Greek mercenaries were absolutely dominant, smashing through the Persian lines arrayed against them. Seeing this, Cyrus thought victory was within his grasp, but his focus was singular. He wanted his brother. In a moment of pure, unadulterated rage and ambition, Cyrus spotted Artaxerxes amidst his royal guard. He charged, breaking through the lines and reportedly managing to wound the king. But this act of personal bravado was his undoing. In the chaotic melee that followed, Cyrus was isolated from his troops and was struck down and killed. The rebellion was over, almost, as soon as it began. But for Artaxerxes, the problems had just begun. He now had a victorious, undefeated army of 10,000 Greek mercenaries stranded deep within his empire, leaderless and hostile. The story of their journey home is one of history's greatest survival epics, famously chronicled by one of its leaders, Xenophon, in his work Anabasis, after their commanders were treacherously murdered during a supposed peace negotiation. The Greeks elected new leaders and began an arduous march north, fighting their way through hostile territory, across mountains and past enemy tribes, all the way to the Black Sea. Their famous cry of Talat, the sea. The sea. Upon finally seeing the coast has echoed through history. This march of the 10,000 had a profound effect. It demonstrated to the Greek world that the Persian Empire, for all its size and wealth, was not invincible. It showed that a disciplined Greek force could march right to its heart and back again. This was a lesson that wouldn't be forgotten, and it planted a seed in the mind of a future Macedonian king named Alexander. Back in Persia, Artaxerxes had to deal with the fallout. The rebellion of Cyrus had exposed the weaknesses and internal divisions within his empire. The Spartans, who had supported Cyrus, were now officially his enemies. This kicked off a long and complex war known as the Corinthian War, where Artaxerxes cleverly used Persian gold and diplomacy to turn other Greek city-states like Athens, Thebes, and Corinth against Sparta. He funded their navies and armies, effectively paying Greeks to fight other Greeks. This strategy was brilliant. It kept the Greeks divided and fighting amongst themselves, preventing them from uniting and posing a threat to Persia. The conflict eventually ended with the so-called King's Peace in 387 BCE. Artaxerxes dictated the terms. Positioning himself as the arbiter of Greek affairs, he declared that the Greek cities in Asia Minor belonged to him, and that all other Greek cities should be autonomous. Essentially, he broke up the major Greek alliances and established Persian dominance over the region. A major diplomatic victory. He had turned a military crisis into a political triumph. But if Artaxerxes thought his troubles were over, he was sorely mistaken. The empire was restless. Egypt, which had broken away at the very beginning of his reign, remained a stubbornly independent and wealthy prize. Artaxerxes launched massive expeditions to reconquer it, but they were costly and ultimately failed, bogged down by the difficult terrain of the Nile Delta and the capable defense of the Egyptian pharaoh. Then, in the 360s BCE, a new and even greater threat emerged: the Great Satrap's Revolt. This wasn't just one rebellious governor. It was a widespread, coordinated insurrection across Anatolia. Numerous satraps, feeling overtaxed and emboldened by the king's earlier struggles, joined forces, even seeking aid from Egypt and Sparta. It was a domino effect of rebellion that threatened to tear the western half of the empire apart. For a moment, it looked like the Achaemenid Empire might truly crumble. But Artaxerxes, now an old but experienced ruler, played his hand masterfully. He wasn't just the mindful, he was also cunning. He used the tools he knew best: diplomacy, bribery, and sowing discord among his enemies. He turned the satraps against one another, offering pardons to some, promising promotions to others, and exploiting their mutual jealousies and suspicions. One by one, the rebellious leaders were either bought off, betrayed, or defeated. The great satrap's revolt collapsed not with a bang, but with a whimper, undone by the very same disunity that Artaxerxes had so skillfully manipulated. Through it all, the king's personal life was just as dramatic. The royal court was a nest of vipers, filled with intrigue, poison, and paranoia. Much of it stirred by his still influential mother, Paris. He had a huge number of children by his many wives and concubines. As he aged, the question of succession became a life-or-death struggle. His eldest son, Darius, was named as his successor, but grew impatient and plotted against his father. The plot was discovered, and Artaxerxes was forced to execute his own heir. Another son, Ariaspes, was tricked into taking his own life by a rival brother, Ochus. Then that same brother, Ochus, murdered yet another brother, Assames, to clear his own path to the throne. It's said that Artaxerxes II died of grief in 358 BC, a heartbroken old man who had outlived his enemies, his rivals, and tragically, most of his own chosen heirs. He was nearly 90 years old. His reign was a masterclass in survival. He wasn't a great conqueror like Cyrus the Great, but he was a great survivor. He held a fracturing empire together for nearly half a century through sheer political skill, diplomatic cunning, and an unyielding will to endure. He faced down his own brother, outsmarted the Greeks, and crushed the largest internal revolt in his empire's history. Artaxerxes, Neman, the king who remembered everything, left behind an empire that was bruised and battered, but still standing a testament to one of the most resilient and dramatic reigns in all of ancient history. We're journeying back to the twilight years of the Achaemenid Persian Empire to uncover the story of one of its most ruthless and effective rulers, Artaxerxes III, also known by his birth name, Ochus. His reign was a whirlwind of bloodshed, intrigue, and reconquest. So, let us dive into the brutal world of a king who would stop at nothing to hold his empire together. Before we meet Ochus, let's set the stage. The Persian Empire in the mid-4th century BCE was a shadow of its former glory. Under the long but often ineffective rule of Artaxerxes II, the empire had been plagued by rebellions. Powerful regional governors, known as satraps, were acting like independent kings, and most devastatingly, Egypt, the breadbasket of the ancient world, had broken away and maintained its independence for decades. The empire was fraying at the seams, and the royal court in Susa was a viper's nest of ambition and conspiracy. Into this chaotic scene stepped Achas, a younger son of Artaxerxes II. From an early age, he understood that in the Persian court, power wasn't just given, it was seized. The line of succession was murky, and his older brothers were all rivals. Archas proved to be a master of court intrigue. Ancient sources paint a grim picture of his path to the throne. He allegedly manipulated his brothers against each other, orchestrating plots that led to their execution or disgrace. One story tells of how he tricked one brother into a treasonous act, leading to his downfall. Another popular account suggests he arranged the assassination of the heir apparent. By the time his elderly father died in 358 BCE, Archas had systematically eliminated nearly all his rivals. He ascended the throne, taking the royal name Artaxerxes III, but his bloody work wasn't finished. To secure his position, he reportedly ordered the execution of dozens of his relatives' men, women, and children he won, who could possibly present a future claim to the throne. It was a terrifying statement of intent. There would be no more challenges to his authority. While this level of cruelty is shocking from a cold, strategic perspective, it worked. The internal power struggles that had weakened his father's reign were silenced. The court was now under his absolute, fear-induced control. With his power consolidated at home, Artaxerxes III turned his gaze outward to the crumbling borders of his empire. His first major challenge was the so-called revolt of the satraps in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. This was a single coordinated uprising, but a series of rebellions by ambitious governors who had grown too powerful. Artaxerxes didn't just send armies. He used diplomacy and treachery, turning the satraps against one another. He offered pardons to some, promised greater power to others, and sowed seeds of distrust among them. His tactics were successful. One by one, the rebellions fizzled out as the satraps either surrendered or were betrayed by their allies. Within a few years, Asia Minor was once again firmly under Persian control. This victory was a crucial first step in restoring the empire's might. But Artaxerxes had a bigger prize in his sights. Egypt. The loss of Egypt was a massive economic and prestigious blow to Persia. His father had tried and failed to reconquer it. Artaxerxes was determined not to make the same mistake. His first attempt, around 351 BCE, was a disaster. The Egyptian pharaoh, supported by skilled Greek mercenaries, repelled the Persian invasion force. This defeat was humiliating and sparked further rebellions elsewhere in the empire, particularly in the coastal cities of Phoenicia, like the powerful city-state of Sidon and on the island of Cyprus. Lesser kings might have been broken by such a setback, but it only seemed to steel Artaxerxes' resolve. He spent the next few years meticulously rebuilding his army and navy, learning from his mistakes. He was a micromanager, personally overseeing the preparations. He didn't just gather Persian troops. He hired a massive contingent of the best soldiers money could buy, elite Greek mercenaries, led by experienced commanders like Mentor of Rhodes. This willingness to rely on foreign expertise was the hallmark of his practical, results-oriented approach. First, he dealt with the new rebellions. He personally led the campaign against Sidon. The city put up a fierce resistance, but its fate was sealed by betrayal. The king of Sidon, seeing the sheer size of the Persian force, secretly made a deal with Artaxerxes to save himself. He sabotaged the city's defenses, allowing the Persians to breach the walls. Realizing they were doomed, the citizens of Sidon reportedly locked themselves in their homes and set them ablaze, resulting in a horrific citywide tragedy. Artaxerxes showed no mercy. The city was left a smoldering ruin, a chilling warning to any other city that dared to defy him. With Phoenicia and Cyprus pacified, the path to Egypt was clear. In 343 BCE, Artaxerxes launched his second invasion. This time, he was not to be denied. His massive, well-organized force, combining Persian might with Greek tactical skill, advanced on three fronts. they systematically outmaneuvered the Egyptian defenses. The Greek mercenaries on both sides often found themselves fighting each other, but the sheer weight and coordination of the Persian attack were overwhelming. After a series of decisive battles, the last native Egyptian pharaoh, Nectanebo II, fled south into Nubia, and the Nile Delta fell. Egypt was once again a Persian satrapy. But Artaxerxes' return was not a gentle one. He ruled with an iron fist, determined to crush any lingering spirit of rebellion. Ancient accounts, particularly from Greek and Egyptian sources who are hostile to him, describe a campaign of brutal retribution. He is said to have plundered temples, destroyed city walls, and imposed heavy taxes. One infamous, though possibly exaggerated, story claims he personally sacrificed the sacred Apis bull, a living god, to the Egyptians, and had it served as a banquet to his soldiers as an ultimate act of sacrilege and dominance. Whether these stories are entirely true or not, the message was clear. Egypt was a conquered province, and its people were subjects, not citizens. With the empire's most valuable province restored and its borders secure, he had achieved what his father never could, reuniting and revitalizing a decaying empire through sheer force of will and brutality. He spent the last few years of his reign on grand construction projects in the ceremonial capital of Persia, adding to the palaces and leaving his mark alongside the greatest Achaemenid kings. He had, by all accounts, saved the Persian Empire from premature collapse. However, a king who lives by the sword, or in this case, by poison and intrigue, often dies by it. The end for Artaxerxes came in 338 BCE, not on the battlefield, but within his own palace. The architect of his demise was his most trusted minister, the eunuch Bagwas. Had been instrumental in Artaxerxes' administration, but perhaps he grew too powerful, or perhaps he feared the unpredictable wrath of his master. According to historical accounts, Bagoas poisoned the king. In a final act of bitter irony, he not only murdered but also most of his sons, clearing the way to place a puppet king, Arsis, on the throne whom he could control. So ends the story of Artaxerxes III. He was a paradox, a restorer and a destroyer. He was undeniably cruel, a tyrant who murdered his own family to gain and keep power. Yet, his ruthless efficiency and military genius pulled the Persian Empire back from the brink of dissolution. His reconquest of Egypt was a monumental achievement, but his brutal methods created deep resentment and instability that festered just beneath the surface. His reign was a short, violent, but effective resurgence. It was the last great show of strength from the Achaemenid dynasty before it would face its ultimate challenge just a few years later, in the form of a young Macedonian king named Alexander the Great. What do you think? Was Artaxerxes a necessary evil who saved his empire, or simply a bloodthirsty tyrant? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We're diving deep into the tumultuous final years of the Achaemenid Persian Empire to uncover the story of a ruler whose name is often lost to history, Artaxerxes IV, also known as Xerxes. His reign was short, lasting only from 338 to 336 BC, but the events surrounding it are packed with drama, ambition, and betrayal, setting the stage for the empire's ultimate downfall. To understand Arses, we have to start with his father, the formidable Artaxerxes. 3 Otius Artaxerxes. The third was a ruthless and effective ruler. He had spent his long reign brutally suppressing revolts and reconsolidating the vast Persian Empire, most notably reconquering Egypt. He was a man who inspired fear and respect in equal measure, but in the shadows of his court, Another powerful figure was rising. The eunuch Bagoas was Artaxerxes, the third's most trusted vizier. His chiliarch, or grand vizier, he was cunning, ambitious, and held immense power. But by 338 BCE, it seems the relationship between the king and his vizier had soured. Perhaps Artaxerxes III grew wary of Bagoas's influence, or maybe Bagoas feared his own position was under threat. Whatever the reason, the ancient sources, particularly the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, tell us that Bagoas decided to act. First, in a shocking move, he poisoned the mighty Artaxerxes III. But Bagoas didn't stop there. To secure his own power, he also orchestrated the murder of most of the king's sons. Most, but not all. He spared the youngest, a prince named Arses. Why Arses? Because he was young, inexperienced, and Bagoas believed he could be easily controlled. Bagoas had no intention of ruling in his own name. His plan was to be the power behind the throne, a kingmaker who could manipulate a puppet ruler. And so, the young Arses was placed on the magnificent throne of Persia, taking the regnal name from the very beginning. Artaxerxes IV's reign was built on a foundation of murder and intrigue. He was king in name, but Bagoas was the one pulling all the strings. Bagoas managed the affairs of the state, controlled the court, and essentially ruled the empire through his young proton. For a while, the arrangement seemed to work for the vizier. The massive Persian bureaucracy continued to function, and the empire remained outwardly stable. But while the court in Persia was consumed by its internal power struggles, a storm was gathering on the western horizon. Across the Aegean Sea, in Macedonia, a new power was on the rise. King Philip II of Macedon had unified Greece under his banner through a combination of diplomacy and military genius. His long-held ambition was to lead a pan-Hellenic invasion of the Persian Empire, ostensibly to liberate the Greek cities of Asia Minor and avenge the Persian invasions of Greece from over a century earlier. In 337 BCE, Philip II established the League of Corinth, a federation of Greek states that officially declared war on Persia. This was a direct and existential threat to the Achaemenid Empire. Philip didn't waste any time. In the spring of 336 BCE, he sent an advance force of 10,000 Macedonian soldiers under his most trusted generals, Parmenion and Attalus, across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. This was the first major crisis of Artaxerxes IV's reign. The Macedonian invasion was not just a border skirmish. It was the beginning of a full-scale war that the Persian Empire was not fully prepared for. The court was still reeling from the violent transition of power. How did the young king and his powerful vizier respond? Bagoas, being the de facto ruler, likely directed the initial Persian response. He would have dispatched orders to the satraps, the regional governors in Asia Minor, to muster their forces and repel the invaders. One of the key commanders on the Persian side was a Greek mercenary general named Memnon of Rhodes, who would prove to be one of Macedonia's most capable adversaries. The initial fighting in Asia Minor was a series of skirmishes and sieges. The Macedonians gained a foothold, but the Persians, under Memnon's strategic guidance, fought back effectively. The situation was tense and uncertain back in the Persian capital. However, another drama was unfolding. Artaxerxes Intravenoso, now likely in his late teens or early 20s, was growing into his role. He was no longer the boy Bagoas had placed on the throne. He started to resent the vizier's suffocating control and began to understand the true bloody nature of his own ascension to power. He saw that Bagoas was the real ruler and that his own authority was a sham. Perhaps nobles at court who were loyal to the Achaemenid dynasty and despised the eunuch's influence whispered in the young king's ear, encouraging him to claim his birthright. Artaxerxes IV decided he would not be a puppet. He began to make plans to remove Bagoas and rule in his own right. But Bagoas was a master of court intrigue. His network of spies was everywhere. He learned of the young king's plot before it could be put into action. Realizing that his puppet was about to cut his strings, Bagoas decided he had to eliminate another king. He acted with the same ruthlessness he had shown 2 years prior. In 336 BCE, before Artaxerxes IV could solidify his power or effectively lead the defense against the Macedonians, Bagoas had him and his entire family assassinated. The brief, tragic reign of Artaxerxes IV was over. He ruled for just 2 years. A pawn in a deadly game of power he was never meant to win. His story is a poignant example of how internal decay can weaken an empire from within, leaving it vulnerable to external threats. With Artaxerxes IV dead, Bagoas needed a new puppet. This time, he chose a cousin of Artaxerxes IV, a man named Kodomanes, who was a satrap of Armenia. Kodomanes was a respected figure known for his bravery in battle. Bagoas likely believed that this man's reputation would lend legitimacy to his new regime. Upon ascending the throne, Kodomanes took the regnal name Darius III. But Bagoas had made a fatal miscalculation. Darius III was no Arses. He was a mature and experienced leader, and he was not about to be controlled by the man who had murdered the successive kings. The historical sources tell a dramatic story. Bagoas, realizing he had chosen poorly once again, attempted to poison Darius III as well. He offered the new king a poisoned cup of wine, but Darius, having been warned of the plot, turned the tables. He forced Bagoas to drink the poison himself. And so, the kingmaker who had wielded ultimate power from the shadows finally met his end. A victim of his own treachery, Darius III was now the undisputed ruler of the Persian Empire, but he inherited a kingdom in crisis. The Macedonian army was already on his soil. And just as Darius was consolidating his power, news arrived that King Philip II of Macedon had been assassinated. For a fleeting moment, it might have seemed like a reprieve for Persia, but Philip's successor was his 20-year-old son, a young man who would prove to be one of the greatest military commanders in all of history. Alexander the Great. The stage was now set for the final, epic confrontation between the ancient world's 2 superpowers. The brief and tragic reign of Artaxerxes IV serves as a crucial prelude to this conflict. His story highlights the deep-seated corruption and instability within the Persian court, a weakness that Alexander would exploit to devastating effect. While Artaxerxes IV himself played a small role, the events of his reign, the rise of Bagoas, the internal power struggles, and the start of the Macedonian invasion were the tremors before the earthquake that would bring the mighty Achaemenid Empire crashing down. The story of Artaxerxes IV is a reminder that even the forgotten figures of history can teach us so much about the turning points that shaped our world. We're diving into the dramatic final act of one of history. Greatest empires, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and at the heart of this story is its last king, a man whose name is forever linked with defeat, but whose story is far more complex and tragic. This is the tale of Darius III. Before he was Darius III, he was known as Artashata, and later Kodomanes. He wasn't born in the direct line of succession. He was a distant relative of the royal family. His early life was spent as a satrap, a governor of Armenia. By all accounts, he was a capable administrator and a brave warrior, renowned for his height and commanding presence. One story even tells of him defeating a champion of a rebellious tribe in single combat, a feat that earned him great acclaim and brought him to the attention of the powerful eunuch Bagoas was the ultimate kingmaker, a shadowy figure who had poisoned the previous two kings, Artaxerxes III and his son Artaxerxes. After dispatching Artses, Bagoas needed a new puppet, someone he thought he could control. He chose Kodomans, placing him on the throne in 336 BCE. Kodomanes adopted the royal name Darius III, likely to connect himself to the legendary Darius the Great and legitimize his rule. But the new king was no one's puppet, sensing the danger Bagoas posed. Darius quickly outmaneuvered the kingmaker. The story goes that when Bagoas offered him a poisoned cup, Darius, wise to the plot, forced Bagoas to drink it himself, thus eliminating the man who had put him on the throne. With this single, decisive act, Darius III secured his power. He was now the undisputed ruler of a colossal empire that stretched from the Balkans to the Indus Valley. But as he consolidated his rule, a storm was gathering in the west. In that very same year, 336 BCE, a young, ambitious king ascended the throne in Macedonia, Alexander. His father, Philip II, had already planned an invasion of Persia, and Alexander, driven by a thirst for glory and revenge for the Persian invasions of Greece a century and a half earlier, was more than eager to carry it out. Darius initially underestimated this new Macedonian threat. From his perspective, in the grand palaces of Susa and Persepolis, Alexander was just another provincial upstart, leading a small army from a kingdom on the fringes of the Greek world. The Persian Empire had faced Greek incursions before. He dispatched his local satraps in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, to deal with the problem. He couldn't have been more wrong. The first major clash came in 334 BCE at the Granicus River. The Persian satraps, confident in their superior numbers and cavalry, met Alexander's forces head-on. But Alexander's tactical genius and the disciplined power of the Macedonian phalanx proved devastating. The Persian commanders were outmaneuvered, and their army was routed. It was a shocking defeat, one that opened up all of western Anatolia to Alexander's advance. The news from Granicus was a wake-up call for Darius. He realized this was no minor border skirmish. This was a full-scale invasion led by a military prodigy. So Darius did what any great king would do. He mustered the full might of the Persian Empire. He gathered a massive army drawn from all corners of his vast domain and marched to confront Alexander himself. He was confident that his overwhelming numbers would crush the invaders. The two kings finally met in 333 BCE on the coastal plain of Issus. The battlefield was narrow, wedged between the mountains and the sea. This terrain actually negated Darius's numerical advantage, preventing him from fully deploying his vast forces. Still, the Persian army was immense. Darius took his position in the center, riding a magnificent war chariot, as was the tradition for Persian kings. The battle that followed was a masterpiece of Alexandrian strategy. He identified a weak point in the Persian line and led his elite companion cavalry in a daring, decisive charge directly at Darius's position. The sight of Alexander and his cavalry breaking through his lines and charging straight for him was too much for Darius. His nerve broke. He abandoned his chariot, leaped onto a horse, and fled the battlefield. His flight caused a complete collapse of the Persian center and a general rout. The Macedonians won a stunning victory. But the cost for Darius was more than just military, it was deeply personal. In his haste to escape, he left behind his entire camp, including his mother, his wife, and his children. Alexander, in a gesture that became legendary, captured the royal family but treated them with the utmost respect and honor, refusing to harm them. This act of chivalry was also a brilliant piece of propaganda, portraying Alexander not as a barbarian conqueror, but as a legitimate and merciful successor. Despite the humiliation at Issos, Darius was not ready to give up. He retreated east, back to the heartlands of Mesopotamia, and began to raise another, even larger army. He offered Alexander a peace treaty. He would give up all lands west of the Euphrates River, offer a massive ransom for his family, and even give his daughter's hand in marriage. It was a generous offer. Alexander's most trusted general, Parmenion, famously said, "If I were Alexander, I would accept." To which Alexander iconically replied, "So would I, if I were." But Alexander was not Parmenion. He wanted everything. He rejected the offer and declared his intention to conquer the entire Persian Empire. The final, decisive confrontation came in 331 BCE at Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq. Darius had learned from his mistakes. He chose a wide, open plain where he could fully deploy his vast cavalry and his scythed chariots, which he hoped would break the Macedonian fleet. He had the ground leveled to ensure the chariots would be effective. His army, according to ancient sources, was colossal, possibly numbering over 200,000 men, though modern estimates are more conservative. The Battle of Gaugamela was one of the largest and most decisive battles of the ancient world. Once again, Alexander's tactical brilliance shone through. He anticipated Darius's moves, neutralized the threat of the Scythes' chariots, and, in a repeat of Issos, created a gap in the Persian line and led a cavalry charge straight towards Darius. And once again, faced with the terrifying prospect of being captured or killed, Darius fled. His flight sealed the fate of his army and his empire. The Persian forces disintegrated. With the victory at Gaugamela, the path to the great cities of the Persian Empire, Babylon, Susa, and the ceremonial capital, Persepolis, lay open. Alexander marched into them as a conqueror. The vast treasures of the Achaemenids, accumulated over 2 centuries, now belonged to him. In a move that still sparks debate, Alexander ordered the burning of the Grand Palace at Persepolis, a symbolic act of vengeance for the burning of Athens decades earlier. Even after losing everything, Darius was still alive, a king without a kingdom. Fleeing eastward into the remote satrapies of Bactria and Sut, he still had a small retinue of loyal followers and hoped to raise yet another army in the eastern provinces. But his authority was shattered. His own nobles began to see him not as their king, but as an obstacle to their own survival. A conspiracy formed around him, led by one of his own, satrap Bessus, who happened to be a relative of Darius. In the summer of 330 BCE, as Alexander's forces closed in, Bessus and his co-conspirators arrested Darius. Their plan was to hand him over to Alexander to curry favor, or, if that failed, to kill him and lead the resistance themselves. When Alexander's advance guard got too close, the conspirators panicked. They stabbed Darius repeatedly and left him for dead in a wagon on the side of the road. A Macedonian soldier found him, still clinging to life. According to the story, Darius asked for water and, with his dying breaths, thanked the soldier for the kindness of final, tragic moment of dignity for the fallen king. When Alexander found Darius's body, he was reportedly moved to pity. He covered the body with his own cloak, a sign of respect. He had Darius's body sent back to Persepolis for a royal burial alongside his ancestors. It was a politically savvy move, positioning Alexander as the legitimate successor to Darius rather than just his conqueror. He then hunted down and executed Bessus for the crime of regicide, framing himself as the avenger of the rightful Persian king. And so ended the life of Darius III and the Achaemenid empire he ruled. Was he a coward who fled from battle? Or was he a tragic figure, a competent but not brilliant leader who had the profound misfortune of facing one of the greatest military geniuses in all of history? Perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. He was the last guardian of a 200-year-old legacy, a king who, despite his efforts, could not stop the tide of history. His story serves as a powerful reminder that even the mightiest empires can fall, and that the fate of nations can rest on the shoulders of single individuals caught in the cross-currents of their time. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next historical adventure. We'll see you in the next one. And now, let the fire take you into a world of calm and dreams.